Our ace, Sean Manaea, not going anywhere. Back as a New York Met. PETE Alonso's market, don't know where it is. Maybe we'll try to find it here on the podcast. And Walker Buehler will not be a New York Met in 2025. All of that and whatever other shenanigans we could get into on today's edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie here with you. We are both rocking brand new hats today on the show. Didn't get the memo that we were debuting new hats, but I got a new hat. Jack's rocking a brand new Mets hat, so should be a lot of fun here on the show discussing all of this. Jack, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. I am so happy that the Mets brought back our ace, Sean Manaea. It's the kind of deal that I was hoping that they'd be able to negotiate. It's the kind of pitcher that I hope the Mets would be able to bring in to add to their rotation. It's great. I'm great.
Yeah, it's a great move, and we will get into all the specifics. And we all hoped that Sean Manaea would be back as a New York Met, and I hope at this point you know that BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC, head on over to BetOnline today, and don't forget to use our promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, the game starts here. It is a 3-year, $75 million deal containing a bunch of deferred money that brings the present day value of this deal from $75 million to around $66 million or so. So it goes from about a $25 million AAV down to about a $22 million AAV. A David Stearns masterclass did not go beyond the 3 years and got deferred money in there. So the AAV came in around the same that we've seen in the starting pitching market. Sean Manaea clearly proved that he wanted to be a New York Met by taking this deal. The New York Mets clearly proved they wanted Sean Manaea to be a New York Met, but they got it under their terms, and now we get to see Sean Manaea for the next 3 seasons as a frontman for this rotation. Doesn't need to be the ace. We refer to him as our ace here on this show, but he is your number 2, your number 3 starter at least for the next couple of seasons, and the Mets at least have one part of their rotation locked in long term.
Feels good, man. Like I said in the intro, it's a kind of deal, the kind of pitcher I wanted the Mets to bring back. It was a match made in heaven last year, obviously, with how well he pitched after a lot of time in the bullpen and kind of had a career resurrection, renaissance, a big year for him in 2024. And now the Mets are keeping him around for a few more years. He obviously wanted to be there, like you said. It was very clear from the moment the postseason ended with some of his post-game interviews after game 5 of the NLCS. And it was good that they were able to get something done and not really break the bank long term because of all these deferrals. So it's really just the perfect situation, I think, for both sides. And I'm happy that, like you said, our ace, Sean Manaea, is back and near the top of the rotation.
Yeah, this is not a scenario where the Mets are taking a leap of faith on a guy and seeing if he can handle New York, if he can handle the pressure of being in the rotation. Sean Manaea has been there, done that. He's done that for this team. Down the stretch was so important for them in the key games in August and September, and mainly the entire second half, where he was just awesome. He was the ace of this team. They didn't have Kodai Senga. Yeah, David Peterson was great. Yeah, Jose Quintana was great. Luis Severino was great. But Sean Manaea was the ace. He was the leader. He was the guy that had dominating start after dominating start basically the entire second half of the season, and there's value to that. And I think what's a really important message is we spent the last episode discussing David Stearns' pitching philosophy, and we said we both love and hate his approach. Well, one of the sort of side quests to his approach or side effects to the way that he approaches it is if you go out of the comfort level that David Stearns has with a pitcher contract, you're not going to play for the New York Mets. And so when all of these reports were out there of 4 years, 5-year deal for Sean Manaea, it felt like there wasn't going to be a pathway for him to return to the New York Mets because it just never felt like David Stearns was going to give a 4 or 5 year deal and give over 100, 125, 150 million dollars to Sean Manaea. And you saw what the Max Fried contract came in at. You saw what Severino got from the A's, and you started to maybe look at how the pieces were lining up and saying, I just don't know if this is going to work out. So credit to the Mets for being able to put this creative deal together, but credit to Sean Manaea for taking probably a little bit less than maybe he could have gotten someplace else to come back to the Mets, because listen, if there's one thing we know about David Stearns is he'll walk away from a deal. Like, he'll walk away if the number doesn't make sense. And this very easily could have gotten to a place where these numbers were not where the Mets were with Sean Manaea. Now, luckily for everybody involved, he's going to be back. You have no concerns about him pitching in New York. You know he's got a comfort level with the pitching staff, with the pitching lab, and being able to continue to refine a mid-season adjustment. Yes, the sidearm stuff was a mid-season adjustment by Sean Manaea. What does that look like with an entire offseason to continue to refine it? And so it's just really exciting to know that every fifth or sixth day, Sean Manaea is going to take the ball for the New York Mets. He clearly loved his time here, loved the team. You love his energy. And look, there are two other things, Jack, that I have from just this story that we're going to talk about here today on the show. One, it's really important to see players that want to play for the New York Mets. That's really important because it feeds into number two. You can talk about culture. You can make it a buzzword in your press conferences. You can make it a buzzword when you meet with the media over and over and over again. But you got to do it. The culture has to be installed, and it has to be instilled, and that has to come from the players, and it comes through action. Sean Manaea taking this deal, Sean Manaea's actions last year as a leader of this rotation shows that the culture around the New York Mets are changing, and him coming back is a great step towards continuing to build that culture and continuing to build the New York Mets into a long-term sustainable winner. So high marks all across the board. This is why you let David Stearns cook. This is why you let him play out, and I don't think they're done. They were sniffing around Jock Peterson before he signed with the Texas Rangers. You know they're meeting with Roki Sasaki. You know that Pete Alonso's still out there. We'll get to that here in a second. So David Stearns and the New York Mets they're still cooking, and they still have a lot of money. If you take Sean Manaea's deal at the $25 million AAV, when we know it's less than that, but just for the argument's sake, because that's the number I have in front of me. Their estimated payroll right now is $280 million. Their estimated payroll at the end of last year was $336. So if you are to say that they can spend up into that number, that means they have $56 million that they still have at their disposal the rest of this offseason. So there are more moves to come. There are still more moves for this team to make. It could include Pete Alonso. It could include Alex Bregman. It might include Roki Sasaki. Might include a DH. We will see. But last thoughts there, Jack, on Sean Manaea, our ace coming back before we move to Pete Alonso's non-existent market as we currently sit here today.
I don't really have much to add, Chris. You kind of hit on it all. Like, it's so nice to have someone that you know wants to be on the Mets. As I said, after the season ended, after the postseason run was over, he was clearly getting emotional at the thought of not being back in Queens. And he said, verbatim, like, this is a quote from him, I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. And so he's able to come back. He's able to, I think, have a better year because he is now stretched out from his days in the bullpen. He's had, a year and a half or so of starting rotation experience now under his belt. I don't think he's going to be burnt out if he's healthy and pitching in September or October. Like, this is all a culmination of a lot of really good factors. And for Manaea to come back into the system, into the development lab with Jeremy Hefner, and continue on the momentum that he had in 2024 with the same group of people, with the same pitching coach, with the same, manager, the same parts of the rotation. Like, he's very familiar with this. He's very familiar with winning in New York. You really said it all, Chris. Like, this is just a kind of a perfect situation for Manaea and for the Mets. I think it's really going to work out for both sides.
I think it allows him to further step into a leadership role because he's comfortable. He doesn't have to learn new coaches, new manager. He's been there, done that. Carlos Mendoza's got a relationship with him. Jeremy Hefner has a relationship with him. He's not coming to a new city, a new place. He's been here. Been there, done that. Now he signed an extension, basically. It ended up being, a 4-year, $89.5 million deal when you put it all together, the 1 year that he spent here last year, and now this new 3-year deal. That's the going rate of starting pitching. You would sign that 10 out of 10 times if you're the New York Mets, and now he can kind of emerge, and he was a leader last year, but I think he can become an even more impactful leader because he has his feet underneath him. I mean, think about it just in any walk of life. You change jobs. It's hard to be a leader when you walk into a new building, even though you might be doing the same job because you don't know everybody. You don't necessarily know where the cafeteria is. You don't know how other people do their jobs. Now you've been there for a year. You can now step into a leadership role. You can step into working well with others and maybe instilling some of that wisdom, some of those adjustments onto some of the other pitchers that are going to be in the staff. So a huge home run across the board. I do want to talk about Pete Alonso's non-existent market. You see it in the title of the show. Pete Alonso's market is gone. I think it's the Mets or bust at this point. Like, I can't see a scenario. Let's just do this in chronological order, Jack. Friday, Christian Walker signs a 3-year, $60 million deal with the Houston Astros. That then forces a bunch of different pivots from the Yankees and the Diamondbacks. The Yankees, their decision is we're going to sign Paul Goldschmidt to a 1-year, $12.5 million deal. All right, so now the Yankees are off the table as a potential suitor for first base.
Right. In addition to also having added Cody Bellinger already, who can play some first
Right.
base. Like, the Yankees are certainly off the table for Pete Alonso, if that was anyone's worry, even after Cody Bellinger.
They're out. Cross them off the list. The Astros, they have Isaac Paredes. They have Christian Walker. Cross them off the list. They're not going to be interested in that market. The Diamondbacks, after losing Christian Walker, make a pretty savvy trade, in my opinion. They get Josh Naylor from the Cleveland Guardians. And they don't give up a ton, but they get him. He's going to be their first baseman to replace the power from Christian Walker. The Guardians, who have a hole at first base because they just traded Josh Naylor, say, oh, hey, Carlos Santana, how about you come home 1 year, $12 million? You can cross the Guardians off the list. Everybody thought the big bad Nationals were going to be the team that drives up the price for Pete Alonso. They go out and they trade for Nathaniel Lau from the Rangers, who a couple of weeks ago traded for Jake Berger from the Miami Marlins. So you can cross those two teams off the list. So here we sit, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, wondering what Pete Alonso's market looks like. And I'll be honest with you, Jack. It feels like he made a very, very big mistake turning down it was reported at the time was a 7-year, $158 million contract extension that the Mets put in front of him. Because, Jack, I can't see it. I don't see a world where he gets 7 years from the Mets, and I don't see a world where he gets $158 million from the Mets. This deal's coming in probably at 4 or 5 years at the most, and if it goes beyond 125, 150 million, I'd be shocked. So his market is non-existent unless the Mariners are going to jump in. And do you really want to go play in Seattle? Are the Angels going to jump in and overpay? Do you want to go play for a team that isn't really competing? Like the suitors, there aren't a lot of dance partners left for Pete Alonso, and it just feels like the reunion. It feels too obvious at this point that Pete's going to end up back as a Met, and it's going to be another David Stearns masterclass because he's going to get him at a price lower than the original contract extension was.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how things have turned out. I said it on our last couple of episodes, I think, when we were having the debate about Pete Alonso versus Alex Bregman. And even, in our last episode, I just have no idea, or I had no idea how the infielder market was going to shape up for the free agency class. And obviously, when one domino falls, the rest fall very quickly. Like you said, within the last few days since we last recorded, all of those moves happened with only first baseman. And it has shifted everything to where at one point we might have thought Pete Alonso has all the power as, the Mets' homegrown star, their primary source of power over the last 6 years, a guy that it felt like the Mets, quote unquote, couldn't let walk. And now all of a sudden, the Mets have all the power. David Stearns and Steve Cohen have all the power to dictate what Pete's contract is going to look like now, both from a year's or a length perspective, from a value perspective. The ball is fully in the Mets' court now because Pete doesn't have a lot of other options to turn to. You mentioned the Mariners. You might have to fact check me on this one. I'm 90% sure that since Jerry Dipoto took over as their general manager, they have not ever handed out a multi-year contract to a position player, to an offensive player. So, I don't think the Mariners are a realistic option for him if they're going to stick with that philosophy either. So, really, like I said, the Mets really have all of the negotiating power at the table now because the first baseman market has completely dried up. There aren't any other realistic suitors, in my opinion, and it's really up to Stearns and Cohen and I guess whoever else to make the decision on how long they want to keep Pete around and for how much. Because, again, not really a ton of other options for him.
So I'm looking at the current projected opening day roster for the Seattle Mariners because you asked me to fact check you. Your statement was what? That Jerry Dipoto has not given out a contract to a position player, free agent wise? Was that the statement? I just want to make sure if I'm going to check you correctly that you have it correct.
Was that your statement? That he has never given out a multi-year contract to a free agent offensive player, like a free agent position player. Does
Mitch Garver count for you? Catcher DH. Do you want to count him? Because he got a 2-year, $24 million deal.
I think it must be 3+, because I think Garver was the first multi-year and it was only 2 years.
Yeah, because there's Victor Robles who got a 1-year deal from the team. I'm looking at Dylan Moore who was signed. That deal's probably Dylan Moore got a big time bucks here, 3-year, $8.875 million deal from the Seattle Mariners. So listen, your point is accurate. The way Jerry Dipoto builds his team is through trades. He doesn't spend a ton of free agent dollars on position players. He trades, because the point I was going to make before checking those names is you look at their lineup right now. Cal Raleigh, drafted player for them. Julio Rodriguez, a guy that they got an amateur free agent, right? Randy Rosarena, trade. Luke Raley, trade. Mitch Haniger, trade. J.P. Crawford, trade. I mean, 6 guys in their regular everyday lineup are trades or players that they developed. They don't sign big-name free agents. And their pitching staff, Logan Gilbert, drafted. George Kirby, drafted. Bryce Miller, drafted. Brian Wu, drafted. Luis Castillo was a trade. They just don't spend big money on free agents. So, to your point, Seattle is just, they haven't done this. And so, unless they're going to all of a sudden do it and shock the world, when we know that they're potentially interested in moving on from Luis Castillo to potentially free up some money, it just doesn't feel like they're a fit. Now, here's the other thing that's interesting to me, because I was looking at the first baseman. Christian Walker got the highest AAV out of any of the first basemen. His AAV clocked in at around 20. You would think, because Pete is 4 years younger, that his AAV will be north of 20. Right? I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable. That he's going to come in like the 22, 23, 24 range, right? Let's just call it $23 million. If you offered him a 4-year deal right now at $23 million, he's getting under $100 million. And so here's where I think we're going to be at a bit of a crossroads here. Can Pete realistically go back to the New York Mets and sign for a deal that's less than the deal he turned down from them? If you're the Mets, you have no urgency to give him that deal again. You turned it down. The market's telling you that even that deal was a bit of an overpay on our part. We can maybe meet you in the middle, but you're not getting 7 years. You're not getting $158 million. We won't insult you by offering, what would that be, 4 years, $92 million if you offered him 23 a season? I'm trying to do quick math in my head here. I think a 4-year deal at right. 23 would be, it's 46 times 2, so 92. Maybe we won't go 492. Maybe we'll go 5,115. I mean, that's what we're looking at here. Like, he's not getting 5,125. That's not happening. 5,115 would be what? 115 divided by 5 is $23 million. 5,115 feels like where this ends up. And that's tough for Pete. You missed on an extra 2 years and an extra $40 million, but the New York Mets have no urgency to go out and give you an overpay because your market doesn't exist. There's not a team that's going to jump into the mix right now.
It really feels like the Mets are bust. And again, it just gives the Mets all of the negotiating power in this situation because it just really feels like Scott Boras and Pete Alonso overplayed their hand with turning down that extension offer. Like, for a second year in a row, there's going to be a free agent that is Scott Boras' client that is lasting way longer than anyone expected because the rest of the first basemen essentially are off the market. Like, Jeff Passan laid it out. The only free agents at first base that are still available right now are Anthony Rizzo, Josh Bell, and Ty France. Like, and how many suitors do any of them have? Like, maybe Ty France goes back to Seattle, but like, that's even one less suitor for Pete Alonso. So it really is just, how much do the Mets want to pay him? How much is Scott Boras going to try to negotiate something similar to the initial offer that they gave, the 7,158 that you mentioned? It's the power's all in the Mets' hands. They can do whatever they want now, I think.
Here's the other thing that I think is it because I've seen this out there quite a bit, and I need to push back on it because there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, now that Pete, just sign him, bring him back. Well, wait a minute. The Mets, I know they can do this. I know they can. But they're not trying to spend $400 million on a payroll every year. They're trying to run an organization so that they keep draft picks and they can continue to develop. So guess what? If Pete misplayed his market and Pete overjudged what he can get, it's not the Mets' responsibility to make up for that and put that 7-year, $158 million deal back in front of him. You passed on it. You had the year that you had. The market's telling you that you're not even worth that. Like, sorry, Pete. If you want to come back, we will give you a fair, reasonable market value offer. And if you can't, swallow your pride and take less than the original deal that was offered to you, good luck finding another deal. But David Stearns and this Mets front office have to run a baseball team. They can't just give out a charity contract because Pete's a homegrown talent. Now, I told you, 5,115 to me feels like it would be a bit of an overpay, going to the 50 year, going over $100 million based on what the market is telling us. So if you wanted to go 125 to really sweeten the pot to get him to come here, fine. That's real. But you're not going beyond that. Like, that's where this ends. And if he's still looking for more, the Mets are going to search elsewhere. They're going to sign Alex Bregman. They're going to move Vientos over to first base, and they're going to do all the stuff that has been rumored that they're going to do potentially if they don't get Pete. So it's not a foregone conclusion, and the Mets don't owe Pete Alonso anything. They don't. If Pete overplayed his hand and Pete misplayed his market, that's an opportunity for the Mets to take advantage. Do I want Pete back? Yes. Do I think the Mets should maybe sweeten the pot a little bit so that he feels comfortable taking a deal that's clearly less than the extension that was offered to him? Yes. But you don't have to go above and beyond. If he doesn't want to take, 5-115, 5-125, he still says no, okay, so be it. But I totally am on board with the way David Stearns and the Mets have played this so far.
All players say it all the time in free agency and with stuff like this. Baseball is a business. All sports are a business, and teams are going to make the decisions that benefit their business the most. For the Mets, that means not offering Pete Alonso a 6+ year contract at over $25 million per year that's going to hamstring them for another decade, essentially,
right,
until 2030. What happened with Pete Alonso is the flip side of the Scott Boras coin of what Juan Soto was able to pull off, right? Juan Soto turned down a 15-year, $440 million contract from the Nats. He accepted this offseason, Chris, I don't know if you heard, a 15-year, $765 million contract with the New York Mets.
That would mean that Juan Soto in 2025 is going to be a New York Met. That's what you're telling me. Based on what that statement that you just uttered, Juan Soto, member of the 2025 New York Mets. Big if true.
In case you haven't heard. But
just want to let everybody know.
To go along with that point, Juan Soto bet on himself, and it paid off because he proved himself to be one of the best hitters in baseball.
Aaron Judge bet on himself. Turned down $250 million from the Yankees, turned it into $360, right? There's plenty of examples of players betting on themselves and it working out, and it's a detriment to the team. This is an example where Pete bet on himself, and I thought was foolish to turn down the 7/158, but guess what? That's his right. It's his right to turn it down. The problem with it, though, is if you turn it down...
Right to not offer the same thing.
Right. It's the Mets can say, okay, Pete, sorry, but we're not playing in those waters anymore. And so, look, I do think this ultimately ends up where Pete's coming back to the Mets because I just can't see another team that is going to pony up the money that he's – and so I think the money's going to be comparable, and so he'll end up back with the New York Mets. But this has played out perfectly for David Stearns and for the New York Mets because after you just spent $750 million on Juan Soto, it's nice to get a potential 40 home run hitter on the cheap in Pete Alonso when you look at the market. One of my pieces of a dream offseason died today. It was over. It was derailed, and I'm a little upset by it. I won't lie, because the Boston Red Sox signed Walker Buehler to a 1-year, $21 million deal. My friend Jack earlier today told me they basically just signed him for the qualifying offer. And the moment that he phrased it to me that way, I was even more angry than I already was because I thought Walker Buehler was the perfect 2025 version of what the Mets did with Sean Manaea and with Luis Severino. And it felt like if he was going to take a 1-year prove-it deal, reset his value, reset his market, the Mets felt like the perfect landing spot with the way that they developed pitchers last year, with the way that they attack free agent starters. It just felt like if he was willing to take a 1-year prove-it deal, the Mets were a fit. And he ends up going to the Boston Red Sox. I got to say I'm a little disappointed that they didn't push it a little bit more. They currently have 5 of their 6 rotation spots basically filled up. The 6th is a battle between McGill, Griffin Canning, and Paul Blackburn right now. Roki Sasaki sweepstakes notwithstanding. I do think the Mets are in need of another starter. It's not going to be Walker Buehler. That's disappointing. Was one of my 2 big free agents that I wanted. Him and Shane Bieber were the 2 guys that I campaigned for, and they didn't get either of them. But yeah, I think this is a great move for the Red Sox. If they're able to tweak him and what he found in the postseason, if they're able to do a little bit more with him, I think that's going to be a home run for them. And I'm hurt. I'm a little disappointed that Walker Buehler is not going to be a New York Met, because if he would have signed a 3-year deal, I could have been like, all right, I understand maybe David Stearns' hesitancy there because you want to see it. But he signed a 1-year deal for basically the qualifying offer, and so for the Mets to not be involved and to not end up with him at that price, that was a little hurt. I was hurt a little bit this morning.
I mean, look, Walker Buehler has been, and you can go back and fact check me, our dear listeners and viewers, but Walker Buehler has been someone we've discussed as a potential fit for the 2025 Mets for months at this point. Yep. He's, like you said, would have been the perfect addition to the rotation in terms of what he has as a starter and what the Mets need in a starter, and he would have been another chapter in the Jeremy Hefner book of I'm really good at developing starting pitchers, but ultimately it wasn't meant to be. And I think if it weren't for the Sean Manaea deal breaking last night / early this morning, I'd be a lot more upset. But yeah, it's great for the Red Sox. 1 year for $25.05 million is a great value for a guy that I think is going to have a big bounce back in 2025. I just wish it were with the New York Mets.
So, and for those who maybe don't know, I live in Arizona, and so I just want to tell this quick story to end the podcast. It is always telling if I wake up in the morning and I see text messages from my good friend Jack, because it means something happened. And I rolled over at 6 a.m. this morning. 6 a.m. That's early. And I see 4 text messages from my friend. So I open the phone, and I just see all caps, just a bunch of messages in all caps. The only one, because my eyes are still a little blurry, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on, but the only words that I can see of the 4 texts are "our ace." And then right above it is a Twitter link, and I see Jeff Passan's name. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they brought him home. And then the eyes got a little bit more clear, and I saw the whole picture. What a great way to start my morning this morning, to get those text messages that Sean Manaea is back. And look, I didn't think the price was going to get there. So to see that it got to this level and the Mets were able to swoop in, it certainly feels like they probably were sniffing around Walker Buehler. But when Manaea agrees to come back on basically what is $22 million a season in present-day value, I think you take Sean Manaea and the track record there with what you've done with him previously than over Walker Buehler. So if I look at it in that context, I'm okay with it. It would be a lot different if we're doing this pod and Sean Manaea signed with insert team and Walker Buehler went to the Red Sox and the Mets were left without either of them. Yeah. Very different tone on the podcast if that's the case. But instead we had a very nice show because our ace is back. I fully expect the next time that we talk, which will be either later in the week or over the weekend, this is just a hunch on my part. I fully expect it to be an emergency episode where we discuss Pete Alonso being back on the New York Mets. That's just my hunch. That's just my guess, my read of the situation. So you're going to want to stay tuned. You're going to want to subscribe to the podcast so that you are notified when we drop an episode. While you're there, please rate, review, share the show. That does a great deal. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps us out a ton as we gear this show up for a big 2025 season. We're looking forward to a lot of the cool plans that we have in store for this pod in 2025. Jack, always appreciate you, my friend. I know you are right up against it. You are leaving the moment we get done pressing record. You're going to the airport. So safe travels, my friend. I will talk to you later in the week. And for all the listeners, we will talk to you later in the week as well. And let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.